Hello, and welcome back to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and today we're diving into one of the Bible's most perplexing narratives, Abraham's marriage to his half-sister, Sarah. Now, this is more than just an interesting historical footnote. It challenges how we understand Scripture, moral development, and God's progressive revelation to humanity. So here's the burning question. How do we reconcile Abraham's marriage to Sarah with later biblical laws that strictly condemn incest? Is this a case of ancient cultural norms clashing with modern sensibilities, or is there something deeper, something that reveals how God interacts with humanity over time? Let's start with Genesis 20:12, where Abraham admits Sarah is his sister, sharing the same father but different mothers. Right off the bat, this revelation raises eyebrows, especially when we consider later biblical laws against incest. So let's read Genesis 20:12 from the New Living Translation, and I quote, "And she really is my sister, for we both have the same father, but different mothers, and I married her," end quote. All right, here's the issue as outlined in the Big Book of Bible Difficulties. Abraham admitted here that Sarah, his wife, was really his sister. And you can see Genesis 17:15 through 16 for more clarity. Yet incest is denounced in no uncertain terms in many passages, and see Leviticus 18:6 and 20:17. Indeed, the Lord declared, "Cursed is anyone who has sexual intercourse with his sister, whether she is the daughter of his father or his mother." And that's from Deuteronomy 27:22. Back to me. Atheists argue that Abraham's marriage to Sarah represents a significant ethical and logical problem. How can we claim that the Bible promotes objective morality when its key figures seem to violate later divine laws? They see this as evidence of moral relativism, and some point out that if morality changes with historical context, it undercuts the idea of a consistent, God-given moral code. As Ryan Zen writes in his January 22nd, 2014 article, Bible Contradictions number 15, Is Incest Okay? He writes this, "As shown in Leviticus 20, cases of incest are to be met with punishment, yet we only find punishment in the case of Amnon raping his sister. But that was an honor killing for rape, not incest. The rest of the Bible shows a nonchalant acceptance of daddy doodling his daughters. So why would a Bible ban something that is inherent and widespread in the Bible? Do as I say, not as I do," end quote. So we are left, like the incest issue with Lot and his daughters last week, with a conundrum to solve. Let's begin with the solution as outlined in the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, where they write this. Abraham was not beyond sin, as his lie about Sarah to King Abimelech reveals, and that's a story in Genesis 20:4 and 5. And Abraham did admit that Sarah was the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife, as we read earlier. However, even granting this, there is no real proof Abraham violated any law for two reasons. First, the incest laws were not given by Moses until some 500 years after Abraham. So he surely could not be held responsible for laws that had not yet been promulgated. Second, the terms sister and brother are used with great latitude in the Bible, just as the terms father and son, i.e. a descendant of David. Sister means a near relative, but it does not as such indicate the degree of nearness as we understand by the word sister today. Lot, Abraham's nephew, is called a brother in Genesis 14:12 and 16, and that's in some translations, not the New Living Translation, which accurately calls him a nephew. Likewise, daughter can mean granddaughter or great-granddaughter. Considering the age to which Abraham lived, 175 according to Genesis 25:7, it is possible that he married only a granddaughter on his father's side or even a niece or grandniece. In any event, there is no proof that Abraham's marriage to Sarah violated any existing incest law. But if it did, the Bible simply gives us a true record of Abraham's era. When God called Sarah Abraham's wife, he was not legitimizing any alleged incest, but merely stating a fact, end quote. All right, back to me. That was a lot of information, and it's not clearly stated in my opinion. Let's summarize it here. First, the laws against incest weren't in place during Abraham's lifetime. The Levitical laws wouldn't be given until 500 years later. So technically, Abraham wasn't violating any law that had been laid down by God at that time. Second, the term sister could be used more loosely in ancient cultures, sometimes referring to a close relative. Maybe Sarah wasn't a half-sister in the strict biological sense that we think of today. Now, in complete honesty, while these explanations seem plausible, I find the explanations about brother and sister just a bit unsatisfying. The simplest answer, I think, is found in understanding that this passage is descriptive, not prescriptive. God isn't endorsing the marriage. He's just stating the fact that Sarah was Abraham's wife. The Bible records it, but that doesn't mean it's held up as a moral example. Let's unpack this further by exploring the issue from 3 different angles. Let's look at this verse from first, a historical context. In ancient times, endogamous marriage, that's marriage within one's family or tribe, was not uncommon. Take Egyptian pharaohs, for example. They frequently married their half-sisters to maintain royal bloodlines. In fact, even in the Bible, we find today's story of Sarah's marriage to Abraham reported without explicit criticism. The same goes for the story of Amnon and Tamar in 2 Samuel 13, where Tamar tells Amnon to ask the king for permission to marry her, his half-sister. While this story ends tragically, Tamar's suggestion indicates that, at least culturally, this kind of union wasn't outright forbidden at that time. However, it's important to note that Tamar's suggestion to speak to the king may have been a ploy to escape that situation. Next, our second angle concerns biblical law in Abraham's time. As I mentioned earlier, the laws against incest found in Leviticus weren't given during Abraham's lifetime. This doesn't mean that Abraham's actions were morally right by today's standards, but it does help us understand why Scripture doesn't immediately condemn his marriage to Sarah. From the Ligonier.org website, on a November 27th, 2006 article, Abraham's Sister, we find this, and I quote, "As we will come to learn, Sarah is Abraham's half-sister. Actually, this is further proof for Mosaic authorship. Sexual relations with one's half-sister are condemned later in Scripture. And so we would expect the author to glorify Abraham and leave out the details of Abraham's relation to Sarah if this story dates from a period after Moses. But Abraham's marriage to his half-sister is present for all to see. There is no attempt to make him conform to later biblical law and show him to be holier than he really was. As for why Abraham is not explicitly chastised for marrying his half-sister, there is not much we can say. What is clear is that God started with a sinner in his design to bring fallen men into his kingdom. In his great grace, this sinner was Abraham." End quote. Did you catch what he said here? This article does an excellent job of reminding us that Sarah being Abraham's half-sister actually supports Mosaic authorship. Think about it. If later editors had wanted to portray Abraham as a flawless hero, wouldn't they have omitted this detail? But they didn't. Why? Because the Bible doesn't sanitize the flaws of its characters. It presents them warts and all. God begins his relationship with a flawed man, Abraham, to set in motion a plan to redeem humanity. And this leads us to the third angle, and most importantly, the larger issue of moral evolution in the Bible. What was permissible or tolerated in Abraham's time was later forbidden. Over time, God reveals a more complete picture of his moral expectations, and the laws become clearer and more detailed. This progressive moral revelation reflects the development of both human culture and God's interaction with humanity. That's the key point that atheists, either intentionally or unintentionally, miss. Think about that. As we learn and understand more, God reveals more. To use a practical example, it's like mathematics. Children initially learn subtraction with positive numbers only, making it seem impossible to subtract a larger number from a smaller one. As they develop abstract thinking skills and are introduced to negative numbers, they understand that such subtraction is possible, leading to a more comprehensive grasp of mathematical concepts. In explaining this further, Jonathan Merritt, from his April 8, 2016 article, From Polygamy to Incest, Confronting the Old Testament's Strange Sexual Standards, he writes this: Yes, there's a lot of incest in the Bible, but we need not assume that just because the Bible records a behavior, it approves of it. An absence of condemnation does not constitute an affirmation. Eventually, incest is severely condemned, and most of the biblical examples of incest occur before the laws were given that condemn it in Leviticus 18 and 20, end quote. This is a nice reminder of one of our takeaways last week in our episode on Lot and his daughters. Not every action in the Bible is a model. It's essential to discern what the Bible is teaching versus what it's merely reporting. It bears repeating, just because the Bible records a behavior doesn't mean it approves of it. That's a crucial point. The Bible isn't always prescribing behavior. Sometimes it's just documenting what happened, like a historical record. Abraham's marriage to Sarah is one of those moments where the Bible is reporting, not endorsing. So where does that leave us? Should we be troubled by Abraham's marriage to Sarah? I don't think so. The Bible is complex, and it asks us to wrestle with stories that challenge our assumptions. It shows us a world where God's plan for redemption plays out through flawed, imperfect people. What's important is understanding that not every action recorded in the Bible is a model for us to follow. Instead, these stories push us to ask deeper questions about morality, context, and how God's relationship with humanity evolves over time. To wrap up today's discussion, Abraham's marriage to Sarah predates the moral laws and evolution given in Leviticus. The Bible doesn't explicitly condemn or approve of the union, and that in itself teaches us something valuable about the nature of biblical narrative. It's not always a rule book. Sometimes it's simply a record of people struggling to live out their faith in a complicated world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the Bible's more difficult passages. I hope today's episode gave you some fresh perspectives on how to approach these ancient texts. If this episode sparked any thoughts or discussions, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, share this episode with a friend, and let's keep the conversation going. Next week, we're exploring another fascinating question. Did the Bible mistakenly place the Philistines in Palestine during the time of Abraham? We'll dive into Genesis 21, verses 32 and 34, as we continue our series on Abraham, and you won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, studying the Bible isn't just about finding the answers, it's also about learning to ask the right questions. My hope is we are demonstrating this each week in our podcast. As always, we love hearing from our listeners. You may reach us at our website, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com, or you may reach out to me directly at our email address, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com, with any questions, comments, concerns, fits of righteous indignation, or just to say hi. I'm always glad to hear from our listeners. Also, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend or two as well. And also write a review and give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or any of your venues of choice. It really does help get the word out about the most amazing book ever written. Again, I'm Lance Smith. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.